Hello, I'm Kads, and welcome to today's video. Today is going to be a follow-up to the follow-up on the effects of the recent Hydra changes on my account and my response to said changes. For anyone who didn't watch my video last week, I do encourage you to go check it out. I do go a little bit more into detail about things I noticed while watching the fights, a lot of inefficiencies with the AI, and just my take overall in general about what I would propose that they would fix in the future going forward. But more importantly, we talked about the damage deltas between the pre-nerf state and the post-nerf state in terms of each of my three teams, and I run Nightmare, Brutal, and Hard on my account. For context, anyone who happens to be new around here, I am Endgame despite being free to play, and thus I'm able to complete the higher stages of Hydra. Another thing I mentioned in my last video on this topic was my plan to increase the damage output of my teams, and I ended up rebuilding 4 champions across all of the teams and seeing what those impacts were this week in terms of my Hydra fights. And as you can see here, with the changes that I made, I was able to restore being able to get above 1.2 billion on my account in terms of Hydra Clash points. Now it's definitely marginal, so there could be some more room to grow or some more room to fall, just depending on the variability of the affinity of the head, the starting of the rotations and whatnot. So it's probably not going to be a cinch every week going forward, but nonetheless, it is a good starting point that at least it is achievable. I've proven to myself that it's achievable on my account. So if you take a look at each of the teams, you can see that my Nightmare team did around 500 million points in terms of Hydra Clash. The Brutal team did around 426, and then the Hard team did around 385. And one thing that I pointed out in my last video on this topic was that before, my Brutal team was giving me less Hydra Clash credit than my Hard team, which told me for sure that my Brutal team needed some work in order to make sure that this was kind of not linear per se, but more in line in that Nightmare should give you the most amount of points, then Brutal, and then Hard. So diving into the damage from the Nightmare team, it's pretty much identical to what I got last time. Last time it did about 122 million, this time it did 124, and this is the same Hydra rotation, so the affinities are the same, so it's pretty much apples to apples. One of the things that I changed was I rebuilt to Hanorok for damage. I just put crit rate gloves on her, made sure that she was crit capped, a little bit of crit damage on the amulet, and then just kind of reran the comp. And then I also changed my main Mishinaki #1 from, I think it was double perception and crit damage, into a 4-piece merciless set with perception. And essentially what happened is that Hanorok did a little bit more damage. It's kind of negligible, but 1 million more ish. Mishinaki did a lot more, about 10 million more damage, and then Husk unfortunately did like 10 million less damage, but he happened to die close to the, or near the end of the fight, or he was the first to die, and then it kind of snowballed into oblivion from there, and thus the run ended. But if Husk had lived for a bit longer, then he probably would have done similar amounts of damage, and the team overall would have performed even better than before, which was kind of the goal. So this is a great example of the fact that there's still going to be some amount of RNG when it comes to the runs. You might lose the champion earlier in one run compared to another run, and so there's always going to be that element of RNG. But I think the main takeaway for me is understanding that the 2 champions that I rebuilt to increase their damage capabilities showed promise, or showed that they actually did increase their damage output relative to where they performed before. For the Brutal team, this is a pretty significant damage increase from before. Last week we did about 101 million and we did not hit the turn limit. The team kind of wiped fairly early on. I rebuilt Ugo back into Relentless. I had her in Reflex because I was thinking that I was going to be hitting the turn limit after the changes, and I wasn't, and so because of that I was free to put Relentless back on them just to ensure that we could actually get all the way out to the turn limit. And then similarly for Mishinaki, he was in a 4-piece merciless set, but I rebuilt him into Relentless as well, and so his damage did go up, and part of that is due to the rebuild, just him getting extra turns, meaning he can get back to his AoEs a lot more often, but more so it's because the team actually carried on all the way till the end of the turn limit. So like I said, last week this team did about 101 million, and this time we came out with 142 million, which is a pretty substantial increase in damage, and thus that is reflected in the amount of Hydra Clash points we're able to get in total. However, it is fair to acknowledge the fact that relative to the pre-nerf state, we're still down around 35%, but that's a lot closer to the 1/3-ish number that you would expect to see, just because of the turn limit being reduced from 1500 to 1000, on top of the extra damage that I'm adding in because of all the Relentless sets that were now on the team. And then for the Hard team, it's basically the same as it was before. I didn't make any changes to any of these champions, but the main difference between last week's run and this week's run is that last week Varl got eaten kind of near the end and I couldn't free him in time, and so we kind of left some damage on the table, but we were still able to carry on until the turn limit regardless, but our damage kind of suffered as a result of that. We did 165 million, and this time everyone stayed alive until the very end, including, or most importantly, all the DPS stayed alive till the end, and so we came out of it with 192 million instead. So it's an increase in the damage output, but I didn't really make any changes, and again, that's just more the impact of, or the swing of RNG about who gets eaten and when on your particular comp. But I will note that for Harima, I did re-roll the Ascension on her chest into defense percentage, so her defense increased by a couple hundred or so, but I don't think that's really enough to add 30 million damage to a run, for example. Now, I totally understand that this situation is not exactly what a lot of people are experiencing. I understand the majority of people who might have been getting the 1.2 billion before are no longer getting there, and the fact that I'm able to hit it once again does not change the fact that I still have my critiques of the changes that they've made to Hydra. Overall, even though the net impact probably feels more negative than positive, I still think the changes were necessary to combat the problems that were very apparent when it came to Hydra Clash, manipulation, broken teams, busted teams, cheese teams, etc. However, like I've mentioned in the last video, and I'll mention here again, there are still plenty of things that I think Plarium still needs to address. They need to rework the AI prioritization, making sure that on auto you actually target decapitated heads to get more damage, you target heads that don't have Serpent's Will, or target heads that don't have Poison Cloud, etc. There's just really bad targeting going on there. I still think they need to deal with the fact that you can relatively easily spawn 4 heads with the Serpent's Will buff. Therefore, you can literally do 0 damage for X amount of turns until one of them takes one of their turns. So it's kind of putting a bit of a strain on using decreased speed, because you kind of don't want to slow them down as much, and so but you want to slow them down when they're alive, but after the buff ends. So there's things that they could do there. I know Scratch had a cool suggestion where, like, potentially Serpent's Will, the buff, makes a new head immune to turn meter decrease and decrease speed, for example, which would be pretty nice, because that would fix the interaction with Head of Mischief, resetting the turn meter on their heads, and again forcing you to deal 0 damage to heads with the Serpent's Will. Or you could just limit the amount of buffs, the Serpent's Will buffs, that can be out there. My suggestion was that there's a maximum of 2, regardless of the logic in determining who gets it, what, and when. You can only have a maximum of 2 out at a time. So there are plenty of things they could change within the context of the fight that would restore some of the appeal to participating in Hydra Clan Boss. And I honestly still do think that they should probably consider increasing the ratio of Hydra Clash points. Maybe go for a 5x on Nightmare, 4x on a Brutal, and 3x on Hard, as opposed to 4, 3, 2. Or by contrast, just coming in here to all of the chests and lowering the milestones. Either one, it's kind of different means to the same ends of just making this chest, whatever the new value might be, or whatever the multipliers might be, making it more obtainable, or making it equally as obtainable for people that used to get it before. So for now, unless they announce some big changes coming to Hydra Clash, this is probably going to be my last video on this topic. I think I've kind of beaten it to death within the realms of my own opinions, thoughts, and my account's progression. But let me know in the comment section down below, now that it's been a couple of weeks after the Hydra changes, have you been able to recover some of your damage that you lost? Have you been able to get your chests, etc.? Let me know where things stand for you. As always, if you did find this video helpful and or informative, then hit that like button down below. It really does help out the channel with the algorithm. And if you are enjoying the content on the channel, then feel free to hit that subscribe button down below as well. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.